Welcome to Sewing Anastasia, and today we are making the Goldfish bubble skirt. The sewing pattern is exclusive to the Sewing Club members for the first 30 days that it's out, and then you can buy it a la carte from the website. So you can choose if you want to be a Sewing Club member or just grab the pattern and sew it up. And if you haven't joined the Sewing Club yet, well, make sure you go check it out. You get a discount on a pattern every single month. So if you like my sewing patterns, it's definitely worth joining. And another perk to joining the Sewing Club is that you get access to our Discord community, which is where you get support for your patterns, fitting issues, choosing the right fabric. So any questions that come up in your sewing journey, we are there for you to answer your questions in the Discord. And since this pattern is a part of the Sewing Club, this video is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be broken up into lessons, including the pattern hacks on how to lengthen and shorten to get the perfect length bubble skirt, along with creating an elastic waist and a fitted waist with an invisible zipper and a full lining. So let's do it. Let's start on our Goldfish bubble skirt journey. The bubble skirt came into fashion in the 1950s with designers like Christian Dior and Pierre Cardin. It also had a resurgence in the 1980s with designers like Christian Lacroix. And then further down the fashion line in the 2000s, the bubble skirts blew up again. And now in 2025, bubble skirts are back. They are the hot new skirt. I love bubble skirts because they're versatile, but they make a statement. You can make a fancy one out of a shiny fabric, or you can make a casual one out of flannel or twill. I love the way a bubble skirt bubbles under at the bottom of the hem. It adds such a nice, fun, whimsical, feminine touch to the skirt. It's a classic skirt design that you can wear casually to the office in a solid color perhaps, or out on date night. And throughout these lessons, I'm going to be showing you how to create an elastic waist, how to create a fitted waist on a bubble skirt, how to make a mini version, a midi version, and a floor length version. This way you can have a bubble skirt that's perfectly customized to you and your style. And the skirt has pockets, if you want to put them in. And the pattern comes in sizes 0 through 48. Here I have a size 4 with a fitted waist, and here I have a size 24 with an elastic waist. So as you can see next to me, you can make a bubble skirt for every occasion there is. I love bubble skirts, and I hope you have just as much fun as I did sewing up the Goldfish bubble. I can't wait to see what kind of version you make. In this section, we're going to go over how to choose the perfect style bubble skirt for you. We're going to go over choosing the perfect length. You could make a mini bubble, you could make a knee length bubble, you could make a midi bubble, you could make a floor length bubble, or anywhere in between. I'm going to show you how to alter the pattern so that way you can have the perfect length. We're also going to go over how to customize the waist. So you can choose to have an elastic waist, or you can choose to have a fitted waistband with an invisible side seam zipper. That's the great thing about creating your own clothes. You can customize them just how you want them. So let's get started. In this lesson, we're going to go over choosing the perfect size, because you need to cut out a different size if you are choosing to do an elastic waist. And Lily would also like to help demonstrate. And this is because our skirt is going to need to be bigger if we're going to add elastic to it, so that way it can fit over our hips. And we need to choose our size before we decide to lengthen or shorten our pattern. So right now it's important to decide if you're going to be sewing up the elastic waist version or the fitted waist version, so you can determine what size pattern you need to cut out. First, we're going to go over choosing your size if you'd like a fitted waist with an invisible zipper. So if you're choosing to create the skirt with the fitted waist, we need to measure your natural waist. So put it at your natural waist, get your measurement, and then find it on the size chart here. Now there is a 1/2 inch ease in the waistband already built in. So here's the size chart, and you want to find your waist measurement in the size chart. And then the size over here is the one you're going to cut out. So my waist is 26 inches, so I'm going to be cutting out a size 4. And the extra 1/2 inch is already included in this measurement, so you don't have to add it or subtract it or anything. You're just going to follow your actual waist measurement that you got. Now let's talk about how you need to measure yourself if you'd like to create the elastic waist version. You're going to need to measure the biggest part of your butt/hips. So go ahead and take this measurement, and then you need to add 2 inches to it, because we need to be able to pull the skirt up over our hips, and you want a little extra wiggle room so that way it's not skin tight coming over your hips. So if this mannequin here is a 35 in the hip, That means we need to find 37 in the waist measurement on the chart. So let's take a look. So on the chart here, you can see that 37.5 comes to the size 20. So I would go with that one. The extra ½ inch, especially with the elastic waist skirt, is going to be just fine. So this size 4 dress form needs a size 20 for the elastic waist version. And that's how you choose the perfect size pattern, whether you want an elastic waist or a fitted waist. And you need to make sure you're choosing your size and cutting it out before you go into hacking that perfect length. In this lesson, we're going to go over how to make your skirt longer or shorter. But what you doing down there? The first thing you need to know is that this skirt is 18 inches long when it is finished. So the length here that you're seeing on the skirt, on the outer skirt, is not the actual length it's going to be, because we've got this inner skirt here, and then the outer skirt is going to fold up and it's going to create the bubble. So this is going to make the skirt shorter. It's going to make it 18 inches no matter what size you're cutting out. They're all the same length. So to figure out the length you'd like, you're going to measure from your natural waist down. Now, this could be all the way to the floor. It could be to your knee, wherever you'd like it. So let's just say I measured down and I'd like my skirt to be 24 inches long. So what we're going to do is take 24 minus 18, and then that's going to give you the amount you need to lengthen it. So this means I need to add 6 inches in length to my skirt pattern. So let's go over that. You're going to need your inner and your outer skirt pattern. You will need to alter both skirt patterns, inner and outer, and I'm starting with my outer pattern. Since I'm lengthening, I've taped some extra paper on to the hem of the skirt. And since this is a circle skirt, we want to make sure that we are lengthening it from the bottom, because as a circle skirt gets longer, it also gets wider. So I'm going to draw a line straight down from center front first, and now I'm going to lengthen it 6 inches parallel to the existing hem. So I'm going to use my quilting ruler, which happens to be 6 inches wide, which is very helpful. So I'm going to keep moving my quilting ruler, lining it up with the bottom hem of the skirt, and drawing lines. And this line I'm drawing is 6 inches away from the hem. When you get over to the other side, you also want to extend the side of the skirt. And now we have successfully added 6 inches to the bottom of our skirt. And now I can cut off the excess paper. So you should have an extension of paper on the bottom of your skirt, however much longer you would like it. And now we're going to move on to altering the inner skirt pattern. Now when working with the inner skirt pattern, it's the same process. We're going to extend our straight lines, and we're going to add 6 inches to the hem of the skirt. And now I can cut off the excess, and I'll have my new inner skirt pattern that is 6 inches longer. And just like that, we have extended our skirt pattern by 6 inches. And these would be the patterns that you would use to make your skirt 6 inches longer. And this is the same process whether you're doing a fitted waist or an elastic waist. Now let's go over how to make the pattern shorter. To make the skirt shorter, it's essentially the same process. We're just going to be shortening the length. Now remember, I told you that finished measurement was 18. Now let's say you want to make a micro mini bubble skirt at 15 inches long. That means you're going to be taking away 3 inches from each pattern piece, the inner skirt and the outer skirt. Since I'm going to be taking 3 inches off the hem, I got my 3-inch ruler, and I'm going to be measuring from the bottom up 3 inches and draw a line all the way around. Now I'm all finished drawing my line 3 inches up from the hem. Now it's time to cut it off. Now my skirt is 3 inches shorter. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the inner skirt, measuring 3 inches up from the bottom, drawing a line all the way around the bottom of this inner skirt, and then cutting it off. And now our inner skirt is 3 inches shorter. Our inner and outer skirt are 3 inches shorter, giving us a 15-inch long micro mini bubble skirt. So throughout this lesson, you've learned how to lengthen your bubble skirt and how to shorten your bubble skirt. Now you can truly create the perfect length bubble skirt for you. In this lesson, we're going to go over everything you should have cut out and prepared before you start sewing. First thing you want to do is print out your pattern. You can either choose the home printer version or the large format version that you send to a print shop. After that, make sure you choose your size depending on if you're cutting out an elastic waist version or a fitted waist version. And right now, I'm going to be cutting and sewing out the fitted waist version. And if you are making the elastic waist version, just make sure you check out the video on sizing and sewing that version up before you cut anything out. But if you are sewing the fitted version, you're just going to use your waist measurement to find your size in the size chart. And before you cut anything out, definitely take into consideration the fabric you're going to be using for this project because it can really change the look of this skirt. So over here, I have a taffeta gold polka dot moire fabric, very party, very fun, love. And then here we have a midi length in flannel. I just love this, so cozy for winter. I'm wearing a very playful leopard twill. And then over here, we have a purple tissue lame. Love this fabric. Actually got this fabric on a trip when I was in London. Love finding fabrics when I'm on trips. And then over here, we have a tulle in floor length with these little silver sparkles all over it. Very elegant, very evening wear. So you can see how the fabric can really dictate the vibe and style of this skirt, along with the length, whether you're doing mini, knee length, midi, or floor length. Those are my 4 preferred lengths, but you could also go anywhere in between as well. And speaking of fabrics, another great way to elevate the look of the bubble is to use a sheer fabric on the outside with a solid on the bottom layer that you can see through the sheer fabric. So you have 2 fabrics you're seeing, and when you move in this skirt, it's just beautiful. It has great movement to it. Once you have your pattern cut out of paper, let's go over everything you should have cut out of fabric and interfacing. You're going to have 2 outer skirts cut on fold. You're going to have 4 pocket pattern pieces. This step is optional, but who doesn't love a skirt with pockets? You're also going to need 1 9 to 12 inch invisible zipper. You're also going to need 2 inner skirts cut on fold, and I recommend using a lining fabric. And then you're going to need a waistband, which is also cut on fold, and I want you to make sure you cut 1 on fold of interfacing as well. Once you have everything cut out, we're going to move on to fusing the interfacing to the waistband. I'm going to be placing my interfacing on the wrong side of the fabric, and then I'm going to place my muslin on top. I'm going to fuse half at a time, just to make sure it's sticking. And now I'm going to fuse the other side. And now I have fusible interfacing on my waistband. And since I am using this tissue lame, I'm gonna iron it from the outside too. It looks like I have a few little bubbles in it. There we go. Now it's super smooth. Look at how beautiful that is. And while I'm at the iron, I'm also going to be ironing this in half so I get that nice crease at the top of it for the top of the waistband. And now our waistband is prepared. Now that the waistband is prepared, we are going to serge all of our edges, and I mean every single edge of everything. And I highly suggest that you test it out on a scrap first to make sure your settings are correct on a serger, or even if you're just zigzagging everything, make sure you have the right zigzag width and length. Don't forget, heavier fabric needs a longer, wider zigzag, and a lighter fabric needs a narrower, shorter zigzag. So we're going to finish the edges of 2 outer skirts, 2 inner skirts, 4 pockets, and a waistband. When you do the waistband, make sure it's open. And if you don't have a serger, remember, you can zigzag or overcast. Now I have all my edges finished and it's looking beautiful. Now everything's prepared to start sewing. In this lesson, we're going to go over how to sew up the elastic waistband if you're doing the elastic waistband version of a bubble skirt. And since you're sewing a skirt with an elastic waist, you need some elastic. So the elastic recommended for this project is 2 inches wide. And then for the length of the elastic, I suggest your waist measurement minus 2 inches, but all elastic stretches a little differently. So what you can do is just take it, place it around your waist, and pull it until it's comfortable or as tight as you would like it, and then you can cut it there. So it's really that simple to figure out the length of elastic you need. And when you're creating the skirt, you can also try it on before you close up that opening, because if you need to make it longer or shorter, that gives you the opportunity to fix the waistband elastic length right there. Now, the sewing of the elastic waist bubble skirt is essentially the same as the one with the zipper. You can put in your pockets, you can gather up the bottom of it. Now, the sides you're going to sew straight up because we're not going to have a zipper there. But don't put on the waistband yet. You are going to sew up those sides with the pockets all the way, and then we are going to attach the waistband. So this is what your skirt's going to look like when you're at the point where you're ready to attach the elastic waist. The skirt is all bubbled up to your lining there. Our side seams are nice and sewn up. And now you have the lining skirt layer pulled up to your self layer around the waist. And so now we are ready to attach the waistband. So our first step is going to be attaching the lining to the self. Now you could not do this step, but it's going to be a little harder because these layers will slip around. So I want you to line up the lining and the self, and we're going to stitch them together with a 1/4 inch all the way around. You just don't want to go outside of 3/8 of an inch because that's the seam allowance on our project, and we don't want to risk seeing those stitches later on. So I have everything lined up so I can sew 1/4 inch away from the edge, and I've got the lining layer and the self layer lined up. Going to backstitch, and let's take a look at it. So you can see how we have the stitch right at the edge, a 1/4 of an inch away, holding the lining and the self together. Now grab your waistband, and we're going to place the right sides together, and we're going to sew up this short side right here with 3/8 of an inch seam. Now I have my seam ironed open, and now we're going to take the waistband and we're going to fold it wrong sides together in half, and then we're going to iron it so that way we end up with a casing. And now you can see that my waistband is ironed in half, and we are ready to attach it to the skirt. Now we're going to pin in the waistband, and you want to make sure you line up the seam on the waistband with one of the seams on the skirt. And we're going to take it and flip it over so that way we can match up all the raw edges. So essentially, your waistband is going to be on the outside of the skirt right now when we're pinning it. And sometimes, depending on the fabric you're using, the waist is going to stretch out. So of the skirt, the waist on the skirt, because it's a curve. So if the waist on your skirt has stretched out and you're finding that it's bigger than the actual waistband, what you can do is run a stay stitch. So just a stitch through the layers within your seam allowance, and it should help cinch it up. Or you can also run a basting stitch in there and just cinch it up enough to bring in that curved edge, but not enough to where you have to gather it. And that should get rid of any of the extra stretch that's happened to you while you were working with your skirt. Now that I have that waistband pinned in, we're going to sew it together almost all the way around. We're going to leave about 1.5 inches opening here by the side seams. That way we can get our elastic in there. But we're going to sew all the way around with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, making sure we leave an opening. So I'm sewing all the layers together. So 4 layers to the waistband, 1 skirt lining and 1 self of the skirt, 3/8 of an inch. Don't forget to leave an 1.5 inch opening when you get back to where you started. So I'm right back to where I started. I'm back stitching and I've left my opening here. Right now, you should have this opening, and it does open up to the outside, but you also have an opening for your casing. So you want to take your 2-inch wide elastic and we're going to put it in the casing. And today I'm going to be using this spring tool for inserting the elastic. I'll leave a link down below if you'd like to check one out. So I'm going to put it in and we're just going to fish it through the waistband. Now, one tip for inserting your elastic here is to make sure while you're putting it in that it's going in flat. You should be able to feel it. Make sure it's not twisting in there. Your elastic's going to be smaller than the casing, so make sure you don't lose your elastic. There's my elastic. We're just going to untwist it out of there. Pops right out, just like that. And now what we need to do is overlap our elastic and sew it together. So we're going to overlap it like this, and you can zigzag both ends down to make it nice and clean. You can also just straight stitch back and forth over it. Both of them work well. I've chose my zigzag stitch. I'm going to zigzag these pieces of elastic together. I have them overlapping by about 1/2 inch. Back stitch, and now I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. And now my elastic is nice and secure. Now we have the elastic in the casing. Everything's nice and flat, nothing's twisted, but now we have a hole in the skirt and a hole in the waistband. So what we're going to do is flip down that waistband so that way we can finish sewing together that little section that we left open. And then after we sew that together, I'm going to serge all those layers together. If you don't have a serger, you could zigzag all your layers together, or you could add a piece of bias binding there for a really nice touch. I'm going to start right where I left off. I'm going to make sure I'm adding some back stitches and just fill in this little gap of missing stitches. Overlap into a few of the existing stitches, add a few back stitches. Let's take it out. And now let's go serge that edge together. I'm going to be serging with my lining side face up, and I'm going to work my way all the way around. I've made sure my needle's up and I've put my fabric in parallel with the foot. You get back to where you started, overlap your stitches, and serge off. So now our skirt is essentially done. I have that edge nice and finished with the serge, and our elastic is in our waistband. We do have one last step though that I'm going to suggest, and that is sewing down the waistband through the seams on the sides of the skirt. So that way, the elastic in the skirt isn't going to twist around and move around so much. So it's going to help keep it nice and flat and sturdy. To make sure you have the elastic and the fabric even, what you want to do is stretch out the waistband with the elastic, let it come back naturally. It's going to get a really nice natural gather in it. And now right where that seam is, we are going to sew through it. So hold it with a pin here, and then you're going to find the side seam of the skirt on the other side. And then I want you to sew right through the waistband here. You're sewing through the elastic and through both layers of the waistband. It's to keep it nice and secure. For the first one, I'm stitching right in that existing seam there on the waistband. So a little stitch in the ditch, add a couple of back stitches. I'm doing it from the outside of the waistband. Just come down to the waist seam, add a few back stitches. So you can barely see that it's there, but it's going to help keep that elastic nice and flat. Now I'm going to flip the skirt around to the other side. Here's the seam for the side seam, and since there's not a seam on the waistband here, I'm just going to come straight down. If you have a hard time keeping things straight, you could also draw a line here first. Come down to that side seam, add a few back stitches, and take it out. Now that I've sewn down the elastic at the side seams, it's nice and even and it won't move. So if you chose the elastic waist version of the bubble skirt, you are complete. You now get to try it on and have some fun in your goldfish bubble. Now it's time to start sewing. So exciting. Now throughout the process, I'm going to be sewing up the version with the fitted waist. But if you're doing the elastic waist version, I'll let you know what steps you need to skip. And if you are sewing that elastic waist version, just keep following along through the sew along. The first thing we're going to do is attach the pockets to the right side of the skirt. Today we're going to be putting in inseam pockets. These here are the pocket bags. This up here is the top of my waist and this is the bottom of my skirt. So you should have them positioned out so they look like an upside down heart from the waist down. And I want you to measure down 2 inches from the waist and line up the pocket bags. And now we're going to pin these edges together. And then we'll head over to the sewing machine and we'll sew the pocket bag down from the top to the bottom. And our seam allowance on this project, on the whole entire project, is going to be 3/8 of an inch. I'm starting at the top of the pocket, but you could also start at the bottom of the pocket. It doesn't matter. Again, your seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch. Make sure you're taking out your pins before you get to them. Do not sew over them. When you get to the bottom, add a few back stitches. And then let's do the exact same thing to the other pocket side. So now I have both of these pocket bags sewn down from top to bottom, and I've also ironed them nice and flat to the outside. Now we're gonna add an edge stitch down the entire side of the pocket, and you wanna make sure that you're stitching on the pocket bag 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. And it's real important to make sure the seam allowance is pushed back towards the pocket bag because we wanna stitch that seam allowance to the pocket bag. This is going to help us keep the pocket to the inside later on. Add a few back stitches and continue on. Remember, your edge stitch is 1/8 of an inch or closer to the seam. Back stitch at the end. And now we're going to do the exact same thing to the other one. Look at how nice that little understitch is. Pockets are looking great with that understitch, and now we're going to flip them together and sew them together. So we're going to flip them right sides together. And I want you to pin going all the way around the pocket so that way you can keep the curves nice and lined up. Now that it's pinned up, when we sew, we're going to start at the top. We're going to come down 1/2 inch into the pocket. And when you come down, it's really important to make sure you're on the outside of the seam stitch, which I'll show you close up in a minute. And then we're going to pivot and sew all the way around the pocket. And then we're going to make sure that we come out until we're 1 stitch past that original seam. And then we're going to sew down. But that's not all. You're going to notice on the pocket pattern that you have this section at the bottom of the pocket that says sew closed. So what we're going to do is sew the bottom of the pocket closed. So that way all your goodies don't fall out of your pocket. So I'm just going to place the pattern next to the pocket and I'm going to put a pin right here because what we're going to do is come back and we're going to sew from this pin down. I'm starting to sew from the bottom of the skirt, but you could also start from the top of the skirt. Make sure you're back stitching and don't forget your seam allowance is 3/8. Now when we get to where the pocket is, we're going to continue sewing up and you want to make sure you're right to the left of the existing stitch line. So that way it doesn't show on the outside of the project. You're going to come 1/2 inch up into the pocket. Leave your needle down, lift up your foot, and pivot. And now we're going to work our way all the way around the curved pocket. The key to sewing around the curve is making sure the edge of the curve stays with the edge of the foot the entire time. This involves putting more pressure on the left and guiding it on the right. Now when we get up to the other end of the pocket, make sure you come 1 stitch past the existing stitch, needle in, foot up, and then continue. Back stitch at the top. Now we're going to find that pin that I put into the pocket. I'm going to start at the bottom of the pocket here. Now I'm going to start at the bottom of the pocket where my seam left off. Add a few back stitches, and I'm going to stitch up to that pin. I'm going to stitch to the left of the existing stitching line by 1 stitch. So I'm very close to it. Now when I get up to where the pin was, I'm going to add some back stitches. I usually like to go back and forth here a couple times just because it's the opening of a pocket, so it gets a lot of wear. And now we're done with the pocket. Our pocket is looking excellent, and you might be thinking, what pocket? I don't see a pocket here. And that is because it is perfectly inset into the seam. But we have a gorgeous pocket here. And this is what our pocket looks like on the inside of the skirt. We have our pocket bag and we sewed it up, so we have a nice deep pocket. At this point, if you're doing the elastic waistband version of the skirt, you're going to add the pocket to the other side seam the exact same way. And then you're going to skip ahead in the lesson until we start bubbling up the skirt. And then you'll go from there. But if you're creating the fitted waist version, we're going to move on to the waistband. So grab that waistband that you ironed in half. So when you're working with fabric or skirts that have a curve in them, you're going to notice that sometimes the fabric is going to stretch out more than you wanted it to, especially if it's a really light fabric. So when you try to pull it up to the edge, you've got a lot of extra ease in here. So you can use a method called easing while you're sewing, or another thing you can do is head over to the sewing machine and run a basting stitch along this top edge of the skirt, and it's going to help cinch it up just enough to fit in the waistband, but not so much that it's going to create gathers in your skirt. So I'm going to go over to the sewing machine right now and run a basting stitch along the top edge of my skirt. So I have my stitch length set to 5 for a basting stitch. I'm going to make sure that I'm stitching just right below my serge because our seam allowance on the waist is 3/8, so we don't want this stitch below 3/8, otherwise we risk seeing it on the outside of our garment. I am going to back stitch at the beginning to stabilize this stitch. And now I'm just going to work my way all the way down the top of the skirt. And you want to make sure that it's not actually gathering up the fabric, but it is going to kind of cinch it up a little bit. So a little bit of a wave is okay. We just don't want to see a gather. And if you do see a gather, lower your stitch length. So mine looks like maybe it's gathering up a little too much there, so I lowered it to 3.5. And that seems better. When we get to the end, I'm going to back stitch and let's take it out. So now you can see how the edge has a slight wave to it. It's cinched up that top edge. And now when I place it down on the waistband, it fits perfect. So that stitch we ran across the top just cinched it up enough to get rid of the ease that was in it from cutting it on a curve. Now it's time to pin the skirt to the waistband. And I always like to pin at one end, pin at the other end, and then work my way throughout the waist. And make sure you're just pinning it to half of it. And it doesn't matter which side because the waistband is a rectangle, it is symmetrical. Now that the waistband is all pinned to the skirt, it's time to sew it together. So we're just going to sew together with a plain seam 3/8 of an inch wide from end to end. I have my stitch length set to regular and I'm going to sew that seam 3/8 of an inch wide. Back stitch when you get to the bottom, and now we're complete with that step. I have my waistband sewn to the skirt, and I also ironed open the seam at the waistband. Now it's time to start our invisible zipper, and I'm going to show you how to put in an invisible zipper with a hidden inseam side seam pocket. I just love this method, so follow along closely. For the first step, we're just sewing one side of the zipper down to the side seam of the skirt. And we want to make sure that the little plastic nub on the zipper is coming to that halfway point on the waistband. That's why I had you iron it earlier, so that way you know where the top of your waistband is. So we're going to flip it over, we'll unzip it, and we're going to place that little plastic nub there with the waistband center. When we're sewing in the side of the invisible zipper, we're going to keep the zipper tape lined up with the edge of the fabric. We're going to run a row of stitches down the center of the zipper tape, stopping at the zipper pull, and then we're going to roll back those teeth, and we're going to stitch right in that crease there under the teeth. Using a regular stitch length, and I'm just going to sew all the way down the side of the zipper here. Again, make sure your seam allowance is flat open at the waist so it doesn't get too bulky. We're sewing down to the zipper pull, adding a few back stitches. And now we're going to sew right under the teeth. All machines are a little different with invisible zippers, but I need to move my needle position all the way over to the right so that way I can get right in the groove of those teeth. Back stitch at the bottom. We'll zip it up and make sure we have an invisible zipper on this side. So your zipper should look like that from the back. So we have one row in the center of the zipper tape. There's another row hiding under the teeth. And then when we flip it back, our fabric is right to the center of the zipper, making it invisible. So that looks great. Now we're going to be placing our pocket on the other side of the zipper tape. And if you remember, we came 2 inches down from the waist when we placed our pocket. So we're going to measure 2 inches down from our waist. We're going to put a mark on the zipper tape. And now we're going to start sewing our pocket there. So we're going to flip it over and line up the edge of the pocket with that mark there. And now we're going to attach the zipper just to this section of the pocket. Might be a little easier to see from this side. There's that mark, and here's our pocket bag. So we're just sewing this section of the zipper to the pocket bag. So you're sewing the zipper in the same way. We're just doing it on the other side here with the pocket. Now I'm moving the needle all the way over to the left for this side. Rolling back those teeth. Stopping when you get to the zipper pull and back stitching. And that's the first step. Now that we have the pocket bag on, we need to continue sewing it to the bottom of the pocket bag so it's fully attached to the side of the skirt here. So that way when we flip it back, it's fully attached. To finish sewing the bottom of this up, I have my zipper foot on the right-hand side. I also have my needle position all the way over to the right. I've started up just a little bit into the stitches that already exist. And now I'm going to sew all the way down, making sure I keep that zipper tail out of the way. And we're just sewing down to the bottom of the pocket bag. Back stitch and take it out. So you can see at this point, we have the one side of the pocket bag attached, and the zipper goes down a little bit of that pocket bag there, and the rest of our pocket bag is attached to the skirt. And that's what it looks like on the inside. Pocket is half attached to the zipper, and the rest of it is sewn down to the skirt. Now we're going to sew the other side, and to make sure everything lines up, we're going to mark on the twill tape of the zipper right where the waist is at. So that way, when we flip it over, we can make sure we're lining up the waist, so that way everything is beautifully lined up. So our next step is to attach the other half of the pocket bag to the other side of the skirt. And we need to make sure we're putting it in the same position. So 2 inches down from the waist is where we're placing that pocket bag. So we're going to flip it over, start at that 2-inch mark, and then we're gonna sew it down with our 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we're gonna add the understitch, just like we did on that other side seam with the pocket. Don't forget your seam allowance here is 3/8 of an inch. Back stitch at the bottom of the pocket bag. Now that we have that seam there, we're going to flip the pocket bag back and we're going to add the little understitch 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, but on top of the pocket bag. And we're understitching the entire pocket bag. Now that we have both of the pocket bags on the sides, we're essentially sewing them together. So we need to sew the zipper on down to a point, and then we're basically going to sew our pocket bag together and then the bottom of our skirt. So our first step is sewing this part of the zipper to the other side of the skirt. And when we sew this zipper on, we need to make sure that we're coming down a 1/2 inch into the pocket bag, so that way we don't have any holes here. It's going to be really, really important. And then we're going to stop sewing the zipper because we already have it sewn down the rest of the way there. So you can see we have the zipper on this part of the pocket. So now I have to get the other side of the skirt on this part of the zipper. So now I have that section of the zipper pinned to the skirt, lining up at the mid of the waistband, lining it up at the waist, and then right here to that blue spot that I put a 1/2 inch down into the pocket bag. So we are just sewing this section here. What happens if you sew this section down here is that you're going to close up your pocket and, well, you're not going to have a pocket anymore. So just sew this section up here. Now I'm going to attach the zipper, same way, add that first row of stitches in the middle of the zipper tape. Remember, we're coming down a 1/2 inch into the pocket, add your back stitches. Now we're going to move the needle position over and add those stitches right under the zipper teeth. So my needle position's over to the left, I'm rolling open those zipper teeth. We're going to stitch right in that groove. Just coming down to that 1/2 inch mark, back stitching, and now we're done with that step. So right now we had just sewn up that section of the zipper right there, making sure that both of the pocket bags as well are going the same way. And we just sew over both of them right when we get to that little section right there. And then we stopped. And now you can see we've got 2 pocket bags that are open and then essentially the bottom of the skirt. So the rest of it is like finishing an inseam pocket the regular way. So now what we need to do is come back and start sewing right at the seam there of the zipper, come around the pocket and down the skirt, and then we're going to sew up the section here so that way we can close up the bottom of our pocket bag just like we did on our other inseam pocket. And then you'll really see the magic that we've created by putting an invisible zipper with an inseam pocket. It's so cool. So I'm going to start sewing my pocket bag. Remember, your seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch. We're over at the side seam, 1 stitch past the original seam stitch, and then come down. Back stitch and cut. And then just like on our other pocket, we still have to sew up a section of the pocket bag here. So that way all the goodies don't fall out. Just gonna fold back the zipper tail a little bit. Blending into the existing seam will make it nice and smooth for you. And now let's go check it out. Here's our beautiful side seam, and there's an invisible zipper and an inseam pocket, and you can't tell that there's either one. So our pocket lives right here, just like normal. We can get in and out nice and easy. And then our invisible zipper starts here at the top of the waistband, and you can see that it comes down, opens beautifully, and there's the pocket as well. So you can really kind of see how this all comes together. We get our pocket, we get our invisible zipper, we get the best of both worlds. And on the inside, it looks like this. Now we have one last step with the zipper. So we have these zipper tails here, and we are going to sew them to just the little seam allowance right here on the edge with our zipper foot, so that way they stay nice and secure, and they take the pressure off the bottom of that seam right there at the zipper. So I have the zipper tail with the seam allowance. It's not going through to the front of the skirt. I have my zipper foot on, and I'm just sewing the center of the zipper tape to the seam allowance here to make it nice and secure. And I always like doing this at the end and not at the beginning, because it makes closing up the bottom of the zipper so much easier. So I'm just going to turn it around, reposition it, get everything nice and lined up. Now I'm starting from the bottom, coming up to the top, essentially stopping where I left off earlier. Now I just need to cut my threads, and we are completely done with that zipper in that pocket. Now it's time to sew up our lining and bubble our skirt. And this method is going to be the same no matter what version you're sewing up. So before, when I said to skip ahead if you're sewing the elastic version, this is where you're skipping ahead to. First, we're going to prep our lining. And if you're sewing the elastic version, you're going to sew up both side seams with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you're sewing the zipper version, you're going to sew one side up, and then the other side, you're only going to sew up the bottom couple inches. We need to leave this section open if you're sewing the zipper version, so that way we can sew it around our zipper later. So I have my skirt pinned up, and since I'm creating the zipper version right now, I'm sewing up this side, and then I'm just sewing up the bottom section of the lining here. And so for this side, I'm just going to mark 2 inches above the hem, so that way I know where to stop sewing. So right now, if you're doing the zipper version, just sew this little section up 2 inches, because we need to leave an opening here later for turning it out and attaching the lining to the zipper. I'm going to sew up that 2-inch section first. Don't forget you have 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to flip the skirt around and sew the other side. Now I'm going to iron my seams. So I've ironed my seam allowance open, and if you're doing the elastic version, you'll have 2 seams that look like this. If you're doing the zipper version, you're going to have another side that has that opening in it. And I want you to turn back your seam allowance at 3/8 of an inch and just iron it back. This is going to help us later on. Now we have one last thing to prep on our lining before we start gathering, and we want to find the quarter marks. So the easiest way to do this is to just take the skirt, line up those side seams you just sewed up, and now the half point where it folds over here, that's our other quarter mark. And then same thing for the other side. Just line up that side seam, and then when you fold it in half, this over here is our other quarter mark. So now we have 4 spots marked. We have the centers there, front and back, and then we've got the seams as our other quarter marks. Now we're gonna make the same marks on the outer skirt. So I've lined up the side seams, and now I'm gonna put a mark right here where that fold is. And I'm just using this big blue fabric water-soluble marker. So now I'm gonna have 4 spots marked. These 2, and then the 2 where the side seams are. Now it's time to gather up the bottom of the outer skirt so that way we can get the bubble effect. And we're going to be doing this in quarters, because when you're working with such a long length with gathering, sometimes that thread can break and snap. So you don't want to have to redo it again and again and again. So we're going to work in quarters, and that way when we're lining it up, we're going to line it up with those quarter marks on the lining, and it's going to turn out beautiful. And today we're going to be using the zigzag method for gathering because it can handle a lot of fabric. When we use the basting method with the straight stitches, it might break and snap because it can't handle all the pressure. So I'm going to show you exactly how to zigzag gather. To prepare for the zigzag method, you need to make sure you have your bobbin thread out of the machine and your top thread. We're going to make sure you have your zigzag stitch set. I recommend a width of 4 and a length of 5. Now to make this method work, we want to bring the bobbin thread up to the top of the fabric. So I'm going to recommend that you hold the top thread, take your hand wheel, pull it towards you, one rotation down and up, and then pull that top thread. And then look at that loop of thread right there. So we're going to take this loop here and we're going to pull that up. And now when I pull this away, you can see that that bobbin thread is going through the top layer. Now what we're going to do, since we have both threads, we're going to hold both threads. I want you to pull out like a yard of thread or so. So it really depends on the width of your circle skirt, the circumference down there. You want it to be about as long as the circumference of your quarter. And then we're going to make sure that top thread is tucked under the foot. And we want to make sure we're doing this really close to the edge because we don't want to see this on the outside of our project later. So I'm going to try and do it really close to my serge because that's 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. Now, if you watch the zigzag stitch, we're going to make sure it's going over these two threads. It's essentially creating a channel. Now you can cinch it up and hold these threads and it's going to gather it here in the back. So you can see that it's gathering it up here in the back because I'm pulling these front threads. But if I let them loose, then it flattens out in the back. So you can leave it flat while you're creating this technique, or you can keep it cinched up because we can even it out later. So it's really up to you. So what we're focusing on right now is creating a channel with these two threads and the zigzag stitch. And keep it fairly close to the bottom edge. And we're going to keep doing this until we get to the 1/4 mark on our fabric. My 1/4 mark's coming on. There's that blue mark. And you don't even have to add a back stitch. You can if you want. Doesn't matter. It's not going to go anywhere. So now our first section is complete. So right here, I have 1/4 of it sewn with that zigzag gathering method. So right now I have it flat, but let's take a really close look at it so you can see what's going on. And then I'm going to cinch it up a little just so you can understand what's going on. So you can see how we have the zigzag stitches going over those two threads there, creating that channel. So what we're going to do to gather it is hold these two threads, and then we're going to take the fabric and just pull it down the threads. And this allows the fabric to gather up on this channel with the zigzag stitch. And then you would gather it up perfectly to fit into the lining. But for now, you can just keep it flat or you can keep it gathered. We're going to readjust it perfectly later on once we get the 4/4 zigzag. Now we're going to do the exact same thing to the other 3/4. So I added the zigzag gathering method to the other 3 sections. So I was starting and stopping that method at each 1/4 section. So now I have 4 separate sections that we can gather up and attach to the lining at those 4 marks on our lining. My skirt is right side face out, and now I'm going to take my lining and place the right side on the right side of the skirt. And I'm going to line up a side seam first. So I'm going to pin all of those 1/4 marks first. So we're going to pin this side seam. Now I'm going to turn my skirt and we're going to find that other 1/4 mark. So here's my other 1/4 mark. So I'm going to line up the 1/4 mark on my lining with the 1/4 mark on my outer layer. Now I'm going to turn it one more time and we're going to line up the other side seam, the lining layer and the outer layer. Going to turn it one last time and line up our last 1/4 mark. So now that we have all the 1/4 marks pinned, we're going to gather up the fabric in each outer layer to fit this inner layer and pin it together. To gather up our first 1/4, I'm going to cinch up the outer layer roughly the same length as that lining layer. And the nice thing about this method is you can really adjust the gathers, move them around, even them out. So that way you don't have to seam rip any stitches and you're not guessing. So right now it's roughly gathered up the same length as the lining. So I'm going to start pinning it, and then I can even it out anywhere I like. You want to try and get a nice even gather. So if you feel like you have no gathers over here and too many there, we just move them. Quite simple. Just even them out there. And then pin. And when we're pinning gathers, we always want to make sure that the direction of the gather on the very edge is perpendicular to the seam we're creating. Because if the gathers are bending down or on an angle or twisted under, that's going to reflect on the outside of the project where the gather is. Because when you sew it down, you're giving that gather direction. Now I'm done with this quarter of gathering, and I'm going to move along to the other 3. So we're going to pin the entire bottom of the skirt together evenly in quarters, and then we're going to sew the entire bottom of the skirt together. So I'm just going to move on here to my next section. So now the hem of the bubble skirt is all gathered up and pinned to the lining. And we're gonna go sew these 2 layers together with 3/8 of an inch seam. I put my B foot on so the A foot doesn't get caught in any of the serge or the gather. I have my regular stitch length on of 2.5 for my fabric type. I'm gonna back stitch and work my way all the way around. Really make sure you don't sew over any of the pins so you don't damage the needle on your machine, which then could damage your fabric. So take out those pins before you get to them. And while you're sewing down all these gathers, you can still manipulate them, move them, make sure they're lined up with the edge of the lining. And if you need to still cinch it up a little, you can. Back stitch when you get back to where you started, and let's take it out and take a look. Now you can see how the gathers are sewn to the lining here, going all the way around. And any of those long threads you have left, you can just cut them off. They're no longer needed. Before we move on to the next step, we're gonna add a little finishing detail. So you can see the way the lining's kind of bubbly as well. We wanna flatten it out, and we're going to add an understitch to the very edge of the lining. So remember that understitch is a stitch 1/8 of an inch or closer to the seam there. And we're gonna stitch the seam allowance down to the lining all the way around. Starting at a side seam, I've got my seam allowance pushed towards the lining. Took off the back of my sewing machine so I can sew in a circle real easily. And I'm gonna work my way all the way around the hem, making sure I keep all the layers nice and flat so we don't get any puckers in this understitch. So you get back to where you started, overlap your stitches by a few, add a couple back stitches. Let's take it out. Now you can see how the understitch holds that lining nice and flat to the gathered seam. And I haven't even ironed this. Just by adding that understitch, it really flattens it out. Now that our understitch is complete, if you are sewing up the elastic waist version, you want to head over to that video with all of the instructions for attaching the elastic waist. If you're sewing that zipper version, just keep on watching. So now it's time to sew the top of the lining to the waistband edge with it flat open. So we're going to take these 2 layers, we're going to flip them back, because I think that's easiest for you to see, put a pin in it, and then I want you to just resituate everything. So just like pull the whole skirt out, flip it, so that way you can get the waistband lining up with the lining here. So now what we're going to do is pin these 2 layers here together from end to end. And if your lining waist has stretched out, like the self, like I was showing earlier, what you're gonna wanna do is just run that stitch along the waist edge, and then it'll help cinch it up. And if you ironed under these seam allowances on the lining earlier, I want you to open them up right now. So don't keep them folded under. So now we're gonna sew this waist together from end to end with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Don't forget to put on your straight stitch, regular stitch length, back stitch, beginning and end. And now that step is complete. Now it's time to flip it right side out, and we're gonna tackle the lining by the zipper. So now you can see how nice that lining looks by the waistband. Look at that, beautiful. So now we want to finish the lining by the invisible zipper. So we're going to open up one of the sides here. And what we're going to do is fold and crease right at the top of the zipper where that little plastic piece is. So I also like to take the zipper tape and just kind of fold it over and then fold the waistband at that halfway point. And then you can see that little tail is going to pop out. And now the seam of the waistbands should be lining up. So you can see that right there. Those should be lining up. And our waistband goes over the zipper tape. And then the same thing is going to happen here with our lining. So we're going to start pinning this together. So now we're going to pin this down. And I know you have the pocket there, but you're just going to pretend like it doesn't exist kind of. So what we're going to do is sew up to this point of the pocket because we do have all these different layers. You're going to stop, and then we're going to reposition on the other side of the pocket seam there, and then continue sewing down. And we're just going to sew down until we get to the bottom of the zipper. So we're going to sew to this point of the pocket, stop, pick it up, and then start here and come down. I have my all-purpose zipper foot on the left-hand side. My stitch length is 2.5, and I have moved my needle position over a bit to -2.5. I've started down lower than normal. I'm going to back stitch, and then I'm going to come back down. It's always important to make sure you're on the left side of the serge so it does not show on the outside of your project. When you get to the waistband right here, you can leave the seam allowance open. I pushed it down though this time. Now I'm going to sew just to the top of that little pocket area there. I'm going to add a couple back stitches, and now we're going to flip it so that way we don't sew through the pocket bag there. And now I'm going to flip the pocket bag back out of the way. So now I've flipped the pocket bag out of the way. I'm going to start right there. Add a few back stitches and then continue down until you get to that zipper pull. Back stitch, take it out. So now you can see how the lining in the top of the waistband is sewn down right next to the zipper teeth. And we want it next to the zipper teeth. We don't want it super close. Otherwise it gets caught when you zip up and zip down the zipper. So your stitch should be about in the center of the zipper tape there. And we just stop when we get to the bottom of the zipper pull here. And now we're going to do the same thing to the other side, but we don't have to worry about the pocket interfering here on the other side. We're just going to flip it over, sew it down. Let's go over it. So we're doing the same thing, folding the tape out of the way, folding it at the top of the waistband, and then we're going to make sure that the waistband seams line up, and then we're going to pin these layers together. And I'm going to line up the lining with the edge of the zipper all the way down to the bottom of the zipper. And now that half of the lining is sewn to the zipper, sometimes it's easier just to tuck everything to the inside so that way it'll lay nice and flat. And now we're just going to continue pinning here. Okay, now we're just going to sew from the top to where the zipper pull is. So I'm starting at the top, adding those back stitches, and I'm going to work my way all the way down. For these next few steps, we're going to be flipping the skirt inside out and right side out, and we're going to be using the opening that we left below the zipper. That's exactly why we left it there. So we have this side of the zipper sewn up with the lining, and now we have the hole remaining at the bottom of the skirt, so we're going to flip the skirt through this opening. Now a good thing to do before you continue any further is to zip it up and make sure that the top waist lines up. So we always want to make sure that the top of our waist is even and that our zipper is going to the same spot on both sides. And it is, and our waist is nice and lined up on the front and the back there. So we're good to move on. So next we want to make sure that this waistband stays nice and flat, because right now if I move, it's going to pop open. So what we want to do is go to the inside, grab the seam allowance layers and flip it out. So what we're going to do is sew the seam allowance here together around the waist. I'm just going to put a pin in it, and then I'm going to continue to pull the skirt inside out again. Now, could I have left it inside out before? Sure, but I really wanted you to see what we were doing and why. Now, when we start sewing the waist together, you don't need to get super close to the zipper over here at the side. You can start like an inch or so away from it. That's totally fine. We don't have to be right up on it. We just want to keep the waist together mostly all the way around. So I'm going to start about an inch away from that zipper. And now we're going to work our way all the way around the waist until we get about an inch away from the zipper on the other side. I'm leaving my zipper foot on for this technique, and I have my needle position at -3. And I'm just going to work my way around. And you don't have to sew in the existing seam. You just need to sew within the seam allowance somewhere, so that way you can keep the layers together. You can also do this with a regular foot. And just keep pulling and flattening out the waistband as you work your way around the circle of the waist. Getting back to where the zipper is, so I'm just going to line this up and stop about an inch away from the zipper. Back stitch. Let's take it out. So we're flipping the skirt right side out through the opening since we're done attaching the waistband. There we go. And now you'll notice that the waistband is nice and secure. So no matter how much we pull these two layers apart, that waistband isn't opening up. So just a few more steps. So now we need to close up this opening here, and you can hand stitch it shut right where you stopped sewing it all the way down, or you can add a little edge stitch, just like we finish a jacket lining. So we would take these two edges and line them up, and I've already got them turned under because I ironed them earlier. And we're just going to stitch really, really close to the edge. It basically makes like a miniature little pin tuck on the inside. So I'm going to use this method today since I haven't shown you this one yet. So now that those edges are lined up, we're just going to add a little edge stitch from here to here. So we're just going to back stitch at the beginning, keep those edges lined up. And we're just going to stitch all the way down, close up this hole. Back back stitch at the end, and our hole is closed up. So we have the hole here at the bottom of the skirt, nice and closed up, just with that little mini edge stitch there. And then our zipper is beautifully in with our lining. Now, one other suggestion I do have for making really nice finishings is adding a hook and eye back here behind the zipper. Because when you're getting dressed, we hook an eye and then we zip up to make it easier to get into the garment. And I would put one on this right now, but I think this tissue lame is so delicate that it's just gonna rip apart and make holes in it. So I'm actually not going to put one on this, but I will put a link down below for you guys so that way you can reference it for how to sew one on. You did it, we are done. We now have a fantastic bubble skirt. Let's check it out, try it on, and go over all the details and the things you learned creating it. Here's the skirt finished on the dress form, and you can see it looks great in the fitted waist version and the elastic waist version. So no matter what version you sew up, it's gonna be great. So as you can see, we have a nice fitted waistband. We have our invisible zipper at the side seam with that inseam pocket attached to it as well. And then we just have the nice fitted waist across the back. We have this beautiful bubble happening at the bottom because we have this gorgeous gather at the underside of the skirt with the lining. We have that nice little edge stitch there, holding that gather down in place. And we can't forget, we got another pocket too. We got 2 pockets on the sides. Just such a great, beautiful, classic skirt. And if you chose to sew the elastic waist version, you can see how you get a little bit more gather in the top of the skirt versus the flat fitted skirt. So that's the big difference there, is the waistband and how it's looking. And obviously the waist is gathered because we use the elastic here. So that way you can just step in and out of it. And then for reinforcement of the elastic, I did go and add a row of stitches here through the elastic, but you can see it still stretches out flat. So you're still getting all of your elastic stretch, even though we sewed through that. And here's our awesome goldfish bubble on. I love that it has the side seam pockets in it, woo, for keeping all my goodies. And I love the fitted waist on it. It feels nice and tailored, but yet we've got a lot of volume. And that's the great thing about the bubble skirt. It's fit and flare, so it feels very flattering to wear, and we've got all this really fun volume and all those gathers underneath on the bottom side of the skirt. Now I'm gonna try on all the other bubble skirts so that way you can see how versatile this pattern is and how the look changes depending on the fabric and length you sew it up in. So this goldfish bubble I made out of a plaid flannel fabric, and I made it a midi length. So it goes down to my mid calf. So it's nice and cozy for winter and fall. And it looks great with some fleece tights, some fall shoes, and a little sweater. And you can see how nice it bubbles even in the midi length version. And we've got a pocket. So you can see we still have really nice volume at the bottom for the bubble, and we have a nice fitted waist. I just love the long bubble. It is so elegant. Here's the skirt with an elastic waist, super comfortable. And this one's made out of a heavier twill fabric. And I just love the way the structure of the fabric creates the bubble at the bottom. And this one I cut in a mini length. The skirt made in this fabric with this length is definitely a casual look. This is definitely a little bit more rock and roll, not so much office. And in this version, I made it out of a polka dot moire taffeta. So fun. This one is knee length, and I'm feeling more cocktail vibes with this one. I didn't put pockets in it. So this one's just really clean at the sides, and it still has just this really great fun volume of the bubble at the bottom. I just love the movement in it. It's just really fun to dance in. Plus, it's elastic, super comfortable to wear. And here's the full-length version in a sparkle tulle. This one is so elegant and ready for an evening out, for a cocktail or a fancy event. I chose to wear it with a sweater just for like a really cozy holiday vibe, but you could definitely go really sexy, little strappy tank on the top, maybe a little cover up or a shawl or something. But I just thought cozy and elegant for this one. Thank you so much for watching Sew Anastasia today. I hope you enjoyed the Goldfish bubble skirt, and I can't wait to see what modifications and fabrics you choose for yours. Don't forget, you can download the pattern right now over at the Sewing Club. There's links down below in the description for everything. If you enjoyed the video today, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you know when the new tutorials come out. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for watching today. And if you want to know what's going on in the studio right now, make sure you check out the Instagram stories. And if you want to learn even more about sewing, well, make sure you check out my online and in-person classes here in Chicago. There's links down below for everything. And I'd love to know which version of the bubble skirt that I sewed up is your favorite one. Leave it down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching today. Bye!